The battle on the Western Front turned into a catastrophic defeat for the German army. Germany had transformed the western coastline into a solid fortress, and it seemed was ready for the Allied landing. However, due to the miscalculations of the High Command and Hitler's own mistakes, it lost the war on the Western Front and sacrificed up to 1 million soldiers. Let us look at the Western Front through the eyes of the Germans and find out why they lost. In the spring of 1944, German intelligence obtained extremely important reconnaissance data that could, if not change the course of the war, then at least delay its outcome for a long time. The German General Staff understood perfectly well that sooner or later the Allies would decide to land along the Atlantic coast. Two key questions remained: when, where. While this was still unknown, Germany was not wasting time. Along the entire coast, a network of defensive fortifications was built, known as the Atlantic Wall. This large-scale project, constructed over several years, was meant to turn Europe's western shoreline into an impregnable fortress. But even for such a grand undertaking, which required countless tons of metal and concrete, enormous human resources were needed. And since the heaviest fighting was taking place far to the east, even the few trained soldiers available were sent there. The defense of the Western Front consisted mostly of poorly trained and loosely organized German units, as well as collaborators from occupied territories, including even men from the Soviet Union. According to the German command's plan, these forces were supposed to be enough to throw the enemy back into the sea, or at least hold them off until the arrival of regular troops positioned further inland, as the Army's reserve. By spring 1944, German intelligence had received new data indicating that an Allied landing might take place that very year. The intelligence network inside Britain, supported by aerial reconnaissance, provided confirmation. The increasingly frequent bombings of German anti-aircraft defenses only strengthened the belief that the invasion was imminent. Taking into account all the available evidence, the German command designated the area of Killala and Boulogne as the most likely landing site for the Allies. It was decided to transfer the entire 15th Army there, along with the best Luftwaffe units stationed in France. The territories of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands were defended by 59 divisions. However, in order not to weaken other potential directions of attack, Hitler had to divide his forces, sending part of them south to Army Group G to defend the Mediterranean flank. Northern France and Belgium remained under the defense of Army Group B, commanded by Erwin Rommel. Soon, signals of an impending Allied invasion began to appear. From May 30th onward, bombings of German positions near Killala became increasingly frequent, and numerous trial deployments of the British and American fleets were observed. On June 6, 1944, the Allied landing craft began disembarking troops on the French coast. As Hitler had expected, the Anglo-American forces attempted to seize the beaches at the narrowest part of the English Channel. However, the prepared German defenses repelled them. Brackets. Bottom of it. Initial assault, but it was far too early to celebrate victory. Shortly afterward, alarming reports began to reach the Wareham Command. The Allied forces had launched another landing in a different area in Normandy. Hours passed, and the number of similar reports only increased. Only the next day did German generals realize the full scale of the disaster. The Allied troops, supported by their navy and air forces, had secured the Normandy beaches and were pushing deeper into France. The landing the Germans had repelled near Killala turned out to be nothing more than a well-organized Allied deception operation, Operation Bodyguard, intended to mislead Germany about the true site of the invasion. This clever Allied move completely threw the German command off balance. In a situation where every hour worked in favor of the British and Americans, the Germans hesitated to take decisive action. Moreover, it was only 10 days later that Hitler gave the order to redeploy the 2nd SS Panzer Corps from the Eastern Front. However, the newly arrived divisions were weakened, disorganized by constant Allied air raids, and lacked both fuel and ammunition. They were unable to change the course of events. Thanks to air superiority, the Allies achieved a massive advantage in strength and equipment in the landing zones during the very first and decisive day of the invasion. Only the self-sacrifice of individual Wehrmacht soldiers temporarily slowed the Allied advance, but it was impossible to stop it completely. Just a few weeks later, during the plot known as Operation Valkyrie, an assassination attempt was made on Hitler. The top Wehrmacht officers tried to remove the Nazi leadership from power. However, by coincidence, and due to serious mistakes by the conspirators, the Führer of the German Reich survived. By the beginning of August, Germany's situation on the Western Front grew steadily worse. As a result of the successful Allied Operation Cobra, the Allied forces advanced deeper into France and broke out beyond Normandy. To prevent the Allies from developing their success, Adolf Hitler appointed Gunther von Kluger as commander-in-chief of the Western Front and ordered him to launch a counterattack. But because of the severe shortage of troops, Hitler forbade transferring reinforcements from other directions, dooming the attacking divisions to numerical inferiority. The Germans planned to strike on the Kotinin Peninsula and cut off the U.S. Third Army, which had already reached Brittany. But this plan was far too optimistic and did not reflect the true situation at the front. Panzer divisions of the Wehrmacht and Waffen SS achieved some initial success, but were soon stopped. Allied air power inflicted heavy losses on the attacking forces, and in the end, about half of all the German tanks involved in the assault were destroyed. Although the battle near Mortain lasted about 6 days, the Americans regained the initiative on the very first day. The German attack failed, and this failure led to an even greater catastrophe. During the Allied Operation Totalize, Canadian and Polish forces closed the Falaise Pocket, trapping around 100,000 German soldiers. Only about 20,000 managed to escape. The rest were killed or captured. The once powerful 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, lost 94 bomber on the battlefield. Tanks, nearly all its artillery, and 70 trucks. From the 20,000 men it had at the start of the Normandy campaign, only about 300 survived after escaping the pocket. Germany had lost a significant portion of its equipment, losses that could not be replaced. As the German army retreated across France, the Allies launched a new landing operation. This time in southern France. The Germans still had a large reserve grouped into Army Group G under the command of Blasewitz, responsible for defending the southern coastline from a potential Allied invasion. Soon the battle for southern France and the city of Marseille began, an important port for the American army. Perhaps Blasewitz could have held the south, but the chain of defeats in the north threatened the encirclement of his entire army group. Therefore, the German leadership decided to abandon southern France and withdraw forces to prepare the defense of Germany itself. Parenthesis, pause, and comma. Pause. Soon, the Allied forces approached Paris. Hitler, deeply depressed as his armies retreated, ordered that the city be held at any cost, and if it could not be, to destroy Paris completely. But fate decided otherwise. The rapid approach of massive American forces and the uprising inside the city left Germany no chance to keep control of the French capital. Furious, Hitler ordered the destruction of the city. But the German commander of Paris, General von Kuhlitz, more concerned for his own survival, disobeyed the order. Thus, Paris was saved against Hitler's will. German forces were retreating all along the Western Front. By September, fighting had moved into occupied Belgium, still disorganized after the Files disaster. The German army could not halt the Allied advance. The German command, and Hitler personally, made the logical decision to withdraw to the Seyfried Line and prepare to fight for Germany itself. However, to prevent the Allies from using the ports of the Netherlands, the Germans decided to keep that country under their control. And this, for a time, worked. The rapid Allied advance overstretched their supply lines and eventually brought the offensive to a halt. It was a small German victory, though one that changed nothing in the end. A few weeks later, the Wehrmacht was hit by a new Allied strike, this time in the Netherlands. According to one version, on September 15th, Dutchman Christian Lindemans, a member of the Allied French Legion, but also an agent of German intelligence, passed to the Germans the plans of the upcoming Anglo-American operation. Thus, Germany learned that the Allies intended to outflank the Seyfried Line from the north. To do so, airborne troops were to seize key bridges across major Dutch rivers, while ground forces would push the Germans out of nearby cities. The operation known as Market Garden began on September 17th, exactly as Lindemans had reported. Germany skillfully concealed the presence of its armored forces in the region, though some sources claimed the Allies knew but ignored the risk. Either way, the German panzer reserves, though smaller in number, managed to resist and in effect ruin the Allied plan. In the course of Market Garden, the Allies failed to reach the German border from the north, though they did capture a large part of the Netherlands. The operation became the Allies' greatest defeat on the Western Front. By November 1944, the front had stabilized. German forces redeployed in time from other sectors, succeeded in holding the Allied armies at the borders of the Reich. Yet Germany was no longer the same. From the east, Soviet troops had reached East Prussia. Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, and Greece had all left the war, and soon Hungary and Slovakia would fall. Hitler faced defeat everywhere. Any hope of holding the Western Front was little more than the wish of one man. In November, the Allies launched a massive offensive along the entire front from Switzerland to the Netherlands. The 7th U.S. Army soon crossed the Maginino Line, but Germany refused to surrender. Once again, Hitler demanded a counteroffensive, this time far larger in scale. The chosen area was, as in 1940, the Ardennes Forest. 3 army groups were assigned. Army Group B in the center, G in the south, H in the north. In total, 8 German armies were to attack the Allied lines. The goal was nothing less than to cut off Belgium and the Netherlands, reach the sea, and force the United States into a separate peace agreement. Hitler hoped that this would free up troops for the collapsing Eastern Front, which was moving closer to the heart of Germany. From all Wehrmacht units, soldiers fluent in English were recruited. captured American tanks and vehicles were prepared for use. All of this was intended to sow confusion among the Allies before the main assault. However, as Otto Skorzeny, who led the Special Forces operation, later admitted, fewer than 10 men could speak English without an accent. Another 40 spoke it fluently, and the rest barely understood it. The German offensive began on December 16th. By December 25th, the Germans had advanced nearly 90 kilometers into Allied defenses. Much of the initial success was due to the daring actions of small German units. Dressed in U.S. Army uniforms and fluent in English, they infiltrated retreating Allied columns, spreading chaos, giving false orders, misdirecting traffic, removing minefield signs, and capturing or blowing up fuel and ammunition depots. The German command relied heavily on its armored divisions and on bad weather. For several days, snow and thick clouds grounded Allied aircraft, temporarily neutralizing their air superiority. But by late December, the weather cleared, and the Allies immediately struck back. Their air forces began bombing German supply lines and attacking advancing units. The Germans, short of fuel after failing to capture Allied depots in Laz and Nur, soon ground to a halt. By December 22nd, the 6th Panzer Army had stopped advancing, and its units lost contact with one another. They never reached even their first objective, the bridges across the Meuse River. Meanwhile, reinforced American forces counterattacked toward Bastogne. Even so, parts of the Wehrmacht held their ground. The Allies, in order to finally drive them back, had to ask Stalin to begin the Soviet offensive earlier than planned. The Red Army struck 8 days ahead of schedule. Still, for Hitler, it was clear, despite the initial surprise and temporary success, there was no chance for strategic victory. The Allied command had long prepared for such a scenario. Because of delays in bringing in reserves and the failure to exploit early gains, the German army lost its momentum, the most crucial element in such an operation. The offensive had failed. Hitler ordered an organized retreat. The Wehrmacht had lost strategic initiative forever. The German army now had virtually no source of reinforcements. To make up for the losses suffered in Normandy and during the retreat from France, about 20,000 Luftwaffe personnel were transferred to the ground forces. The Vulcan militia of old men and boys became widespread. Hitler desperately tried to hold the country together, but it was already impossible. In February 1945, another tragedy struck, the bombing of Dresden. Over a few days, Allied aircraft almost completely destroyed the city. According to modern estimates, about 29,000 people were killed. Through February and March, Germany continued its final retreat. In a desperate attempt to slow the Allied advance, the German command ordered the destruction of dams and the opening of floodgates on the Ruhr River, which delayed the U.S. Ninth Army's offensive by about 2 weeks. By late February, the waters receded, and on February 23rd, the Allies crossed the Ruhr. The German position on the west bank of the Rhine became hopeless. On March 7th, the U.S. 9th Armored Division and 1st Army captured the Remagen Bridge, crossed to the east bank of the Rhine, and secured their foothold. Within a single day, the Americans transferred 5 divisions across that bridge. On March 10th, the Germans, suffering heavy losses in men and equipment, withdrew across the river. The situation was catastrophic. The lack of resources made it impossible for the German command to create a stable defense anywhere on the Western Front. Even in the strategically vital Ruhr region, the remaining reserves were too few to make a difference. By late March, the Allied command decided to focus its main effort on destroying the Ruhr pocket and capturing Germany's most important industrial area. During February and March, as part of the Moss-Rhin operation, the Allies had already seized the Saar region, making the Ruhr even more vital to the Wehrmacht. Before the new offensive, a powerful 12-day air bombardment destroyed key bridges and communication hubs, severely disrupting German logistics. This effectively sealed the fate of hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. Within a week, Allied troops, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. Within a week, Allied troops completely encircled Army Group B and its commander, Walter Model. The Germans attempted to break out, but it was beyond their strength. The surrounded forces were demoralized and short of weapons, ammunition, and supplies. Nevertheless, the command ordered them to hold out in the Ruhr as long as possible, to tie down American and British troops. It was a desperate decision, but effective, since it did indeed force the Allies to destroy the Ruhr pocket completely. This marked the collapse of the entire German Western Front. Organized resistance ceased. Allied armies advanced rapidly eastward, moving freely through Germany and meeting only scattered opposition. On April 25th, Soviet and Allied forces split Germany in two. That same day, the Red Army began the assault on Berlin. The Reich, in agony, was living its final days. By April 30th, news spread that Hitler had shot himself in his bunker. Only after the full occupation of southern Germany and Austria did all resistance end. During the night of May 8th to 9th, 1945, the German High Command signed the Act of Unconditional Surrender of Nazi Germany. Two reasons for Germany's defeat on the Western Front were the catastrophic error in determining the true site of the Allied landing back in June 1944. Had Germany managed to throw the Allies back into the sea, the heavy losses might have forced them to abandon plans for a northern invasion altogether. The orders to attack from the Files pocket and later in the Ardennes were far too optimistic and only inflicted further irrecoverable losses on the already weakened Wehrmacht. At the same time, the Soviet advance in the east was rapidly destroying Germany's military machine and drawing away its last reserves. Discover the untold story of World War II. The Western Front through German eyes. How did Germany, once so powerful, lose everything on its own doorstep? From D-Day and the Falaise pocket to the fall of the Reich, this video reveals the truth behind their downfall.